Hello and welcome to Theology Matters. This is Dr. John Clark, and we're going to continue our interview with our special guest, Pastor Dennis Rokser with Grace and Truth Bible Church. And Dennis, again, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to just go over some of these questions. We got to know you a little bit in the last segment. And in this segment, I want to talk to you a little bit more about prepping young men for potential pastoral ministry or full-time ministry, missions ministry, whatever we might want to call that. And so, kind of question number one is just from your perspective, your experience having planted churches or being a part of church plants, seeing what you've seen and experienced over the years with different young people and middle-aged people and older people, what do you think would be the ideal track for, let's say, a 22 to 25-year-old man who's got a desire to serve in pastoral ministry one day? What steps do you think he should take? And hypothetically, how long should the process take if you have answers to those?
Yeah, well, thank you. There's a lot to be said about that from just basically a biblical perspective before you get down to the nuts and bolts of it. When I went to Bible college um, in 1975 through 77, I went to Appalachian Bible College in Beckley, West Virginia there. And there were many things that were helpful for me at the school. It was a good time for me to just grow up personally. I went in, I was only 20 years old when I went in, and but still, I was a little older as a freshman than the freshmen were, per se. And a number of the teachers were from Dallas Seminary, kind of the old Dallas, and in doing so, they were usually dispensational. Calvinism wasn't really a big issue at that point, per se. And I benefited from some of the classes, some more than others. Um, but I began to really think through this biblically about how a situation like that is kind of like a data dump. You come and you get class after class, and you get through these classes in 4 years. You've learned this information, but the fact is, you haven't had a chance to assimilate it. You haven't had a chance to apply it. It really hasn't transformed your life much yet because you haven't had a chance to digest it even. You just have kind of pushed through from one class to another. And I think there's a great misconception to think just because someone now is, the average graduate's probably 22 years old, 23 years old, that they're somehow ready for pastoral ministry. I mean, I think that's a great misconception. When you look at the qualifications of a pastor, whether it be in 1 Timothy 3 or Titus chapter 1, except for the issue of apt to teach, and obviously along with that, that you have to be able to hold fast to sound doctrine, which means you know sound doctrine. They're all character qualities and they're maturity issues. And the fact is, so often people don't factor in the element of time in the maturity process. So you think because you get a degree that somehow you are ready for ministry, and probably you're not ready for ministry. You haven't had time again to grow, mature, assimilate, apply, get mentored, and so forth and so forth. And so, while I'm not against a formal education per se, I do also recognize Bible colleges tend to be sterile environments. It's not real life. I was an RA my second year at the school, and in doing so, I had to deal with a lot of childish behavior on the part of the students. And then I would think to myself, and they're planning to be missionaries and pastors. God forbid. Let's have a prayer meeting right now. And so, and also, one of the chapters in his book, Principles of Spiritual Growth, or the Green Letters, by Miles Stanford, he has a chapter on time. And again, he uses a quote that talks about the fact that, if you want to be a squash, it takes 6 months. If you want to be an oak tree, it's going to take years. And I'm not saying that after someone gets into the pastorate, they don't need to keep growing. I mean, they need to continue to keep growing, but they need to be at a level of maturity that just a diploma from an institute doesn't give you. It's called walking with the Lord. It's called spiritual growth. It's called life experience. It's called getting your spiritual gifts more developed. It's getting mentored and so forth and so forth. And see, the context of all of that really should be the local church. So I remember when I left Bible college, and I didn't leave because I had poor grades. I had the best grades I ever had in my life, because now I was actually doing this as unto the Lord and motivated to do it. Um, I remember telling the Lord, Lord, if you ever want me to pastor by your grace, I would really like to train men from within our church that they don't have to go to Bible college because there would be an option for them. And it would be real life, it would be in the church, because you see, everything ideally comes in the church or through the church by way of ministry. And so the best way to learn that is to be part of the church, which is again, oftentimes when people leave Bible college in their years of Bible college, a lot of times they're not very involved in a local church there. It's not their home church. And so that's why eventually I was led of the Lord in 1992 to start the Grace Institute of Biblical Studies. And we did that in order to provide in-house training both doctrinally and then practically for people that were interested in going to specialized kind of ministry. You know, not just teaching Sunday school, but actually thinking of like pastors, missionaries, things like that. And so in 1992, that began. And as a result of that, we were also planting churches in that era. I pastored Duluth Bible Church at that time. And in doing so, those church plants became the very places that some of those students of after their training would eventually pastor. And many of them are still the pastors to this day. You know, and that was probably most of the churches we planted were around 1997, 98, right there. And so one of them, like Dave Knutson, he's 75 now, I think 77. He just retired here a couple years ago. But most of the other men, like Sean Laughlin, as it were, and Rick Gerhardt and so forth, other people that's heard on Grace Global Radio actually, were men that I had the privilege of training back in the day. But the training involved more than just the classroom. It involved ministry experience. It involved feedback. You see, you can get up and preach a message and think you did a great job, but somebody who knows better might say it wasn't. You know, there's the areas to grow. Without feedback to your messages and your ministry, you're going to function within a standard that's in your own thinking that may be far below what it ought to be. And also, how do you grow? How do you become a better speaker if you're not getting both in positive and maybe corrective, you want to call it, encouraging feedback on how to grow in these areas? And so I just think the local church really is where it's all at, John. I'm a very strong local church advocate. I'm thankful wherever the word of God's being taught. But at the end of the day, the local church is what God is using. He's building his church. And one of the things in pastoral ministry, John, that I resolved early on is Jesus said he would build the church. He never asked me to do it.
Mhm.
You know, I think pastors get into trouble when they try to roll up their sleeves and try to build their church. The Lord said he would do it. What he did say to me though is he said, I'm to preach the word, you know, and so that's critically important that that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's excellent. I'll just add, just because we have personal connection here, but even the young man who's replaced Dave Knutson was a Gibbs trained young
Yes.
man. So you starting to see some generational, if you will, training there, and that's just really encouraging to see. So no, I think you're exactly right. I think you hit on a couple things there, and a lot of it is time and maturity. So there's probably not a formula per se that works with everybody. It's going to be a little bit different, but there are key components to this growth, spiritual growth, that you can't bypass, uh,
Yes.
and that's between the Lord and that individual, and also the oversight of a local church. So
Yeah, and I do think also when it comes to training, you know, if they're going to be involved in an expository teaching ministry, you don't teach that over the pulpit in your church. You demonstrate it,
Mm.
but you have to teach it on side and you have to give them some tools to know how to go about doing that. Also, knowing Greek or Hebrew and how to do exegesis, all of that is critically important as well if they're going to have that kind of ministry.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Let me kind of ask a related question. What do you think churches, pastors, elders can do better, just in the Church of Jesus Christ at large, in preparing young men with the gift of pastor teacher for the ministry, or maybe even sometimes you just don't know out of the chute if a young man's got the gift of pastor teacher, but he seems to have a teaching gift. And so
Yeah.
how can churches, pastors, elders, what can we do better? Just over the years, maybe some lessons you've learned on that.
Yeah, I think again, being equipped in the local church is really helpful and important. Now that's assuming that your local church is a good church, you know, and is biblical, is in their teaching and is thinking this way. You see, this wasn't just a program on the side. This was part of the whole flow and thinking of Duluth Bible Church about the training up of men. And then they were given opportunities to exercise to teach the Word of God, to get feedback on it I always have to joke about Harry Ironsides of yesteryear, who pastored Moody Church at one point, said in a question he was asked about knowing that I have a desire to preach and whatever, but where do you find opportunities? And he said, pity the man who feels called to preach and no one feels called to listen. And there's something to be said about that. I just heard Chuck Swindoll share a story along those same lines. Some guy at Dallas Seminary felt really called to preach, and it was just like painful. And so a pastor sat down with him. One of his professors sat down with him and had him listen to some things and say, no, no, what do you think of that? And the guy was even more convinced that he feels called to preach. And it was just horrible. And finally, someone had to say, you know what? No one's going to listen to you.
Oh no. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not going to go well. See, and those are hard conversations to have, obviously, and so, but again, training from within, I think is helpful. I think one of the difficulties is the average pastor and elders usually are very busy already.
Mm,
So it's hard to find time to be able to do that. But I just think if you have hospitality and you have people over, you bring in some of those students, as well with their families and you watch them. They just get discipled slash mentored
mm,
by having experiences like that. I've taken them on mission trips. I've had them over to my house so they can see what we do, so forth, so forth. And some of them are really excel at it as time goes on and maybe have more time than you do to do it even. But again, you can't put a price tag on ministry.
mm.
See, I've been involved in pastoral kind of ministry like 44 years now, and I'm going to be replaced at our church there in Georgia coming up. We're looking for a replacement, and in doing so, I couldn't help but reflect. We're going to have to find someone obviously younger than me, da 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 da. But you can't put a premium on all that experience
Mm.
that I've had,
Yeah.
good, bad, and ugly,
Yeah.
you know, because the every person who walks through that door is packing a sin nature yet. Even as a believer, they've
That's
got a certain amount of human viewpoint in their thinking,
yeah.
and they're not always going to walk in spirituality, and so you're going to have to deal with all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really good advice. I Years ago, it kind of relates to this. Years ago, we used to tell mothers and fathers in our church when they go to pick up their kids at nursery. We used to tell them, don't ask the nursery workers or the Sunday school teachers, as it were, how'd it go. It makes it hard for them to give you the feedback that you really need. Ask, was there anything you had to correct my child over? Was there
Mhm.
anything that you had to correct my child or discipline my child? What do you need to tell us? And so, as I think of young men wanting to go into the ministry, just as an encouragement to them, if they're listening, is to pursue your pastor and elders, because as you said, Dennis, we are busy. Our minds do get pulled a lot of different directions. There are things that we're administrating. But if they continue to pursue and ask questions and be correctable, not just teach a lesson, but say, hey, how did I do? No, tell me specifically. Just being humble and correctable is just such a good way to go forward. And so I tell you what, we'll continue this interview next time with some additional questions.
Thank you.